This is the one that many of you guys have been waiting for, the F-14 XXL from Skymaster, and this thing begins now. All right, so for a few months, this plane has lived on our adjustable stand, and I would love to leave it there to work on it, but really we can't. Basically what needs to happen with this F-14 XXL is our front part of our fuselage here needs to get separated from our back part of our fuselage because most of our equipment is going right in this area right there. So it's going to be a bit of an interesting setup with this F-14, but ultimately it's going to work well. It's just going to be a bit of a struggle getting through the first steps until we join the fuselage, which is probably going to be like 3/4 of the way through the build series. So anyways, I'll tell you what we're doing. So we've got to split the fuselage, so we're going to do that. The split is right there. The Millennium Falcon portion, which is back here, separates from the front portion. So we'll get that split and separated. That makes the front end a little bit easier to work with, but the back end becomes a little bit more challenging. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to deal with that yet. This is going to be a bit of a figure it out as you go. All of our gear is coming out as well too. We have to service all the gear like normal with our Skymaster aircraft. Everything's got to be Locktited, so there's a whole bunch of stuff to deal with. But I think the first step is we're going to get this thing off the workbench and get the fuselage split. Now I know when we generally start a build series, we go through all the equipment. We will be doing that very shortly, but we have to get it laid out on a table, and I want to deal with this fuselage first, and then we'll take a look at all the equipment going in this aircraft. Okay, so first step to separating our fuselage here is we've got to take our canopy off, got to take our cockpits out, and that will allow us access to our fasteners that join the two fuselage pieces together. All right, so the name of the game with this F-14 is as light as possible. We are doing no extras in this aircraft, no big gear plates, nothing fancy, no painting on the inside, none of that stuff. It's got to be as light as possible. We basically have a weight limit at the location where this aircraft is going to finally live, and we have to be within that weight basically. So to pull the cockpit out, we pull the rear cockpit out first, and that is fairly straightforward to pull out. Front cockpit, you undo the mounting bolts back here, that drops down, and the front hood area slides out. And then the next thing to get out is going to be this cockpit piece. So very well designed. The front doesn't look like it has a lot of support. Again, we can't add a whole bunch of structure and a whole bunch of extra stuff in here. So we're gonna have to keep an eye on that and see if there's anything that we need to add. But hopefully the stock setup is sufficient. But that's what it looks like as soon as you pull the cockpit out. We haven't even had the cockpit out of this thing yet. So there she is. And sometimes when you're removing this stuff, it just kind of has to be at just the right angle, the right position. I have a feeling this is going to be one of those scenarios. One of the reasons that I put this on the video was because it's always nice to know how this goes back in the aircraft. We may have to undo this seat first, actually. As well, to explain how we are going to lay out this aircraft. Now you can imagine you don't want to be taking this cockpit out really ever. So all of our equipment is going to be hidden in this section from here to here. This is basically the area we have to install all of our equipment in the aircraft. Nothing's going to be mounted in the front of the aircraft. Basically, we're going to have our batteries in the front section, and that is it. So we're going to have access to all of our devices through extension ports, much like what we did on the SU that's behind me and we just finished up. So we're going to have all this stuff buried in the aircraft, but we are going to have access to the EXT port or the data port or the main port on all the devices. So that's something to keep in mind as well when you're organizing things. All right, so seat here, we just unscrew it with our two screws, and now the seat is separated from the front cockpit, and now our front cockpit's gonna come out nice and easy. All right, so fuselage is separated. Now, you gotta be very careful with these large fuselages. For example, you wouldn't want to support this fuselage underneath here. It's very soft and there's no real support in this area. You can support it on the leading edge, but again, it's not extremely strong, so you just got to be mindful of that. And this isn't overly heavy at all. I actually have an exercise ball in there. It's very well balanced over the mains. So I've just got this sitting on the intake leading edges there just to support it while I was separating the two fuselage pieces. So step number one is going to be to pull our gear out. That's kind of the baseline of everything that we have to get done. Oh, this is for the front gear support, or front cockpit support. Nice. That's good. That's why that front cockpit was a little bit loose. So yes, as I was saying, we have to pull the gear out as a first step. That's going to be the first step on the front portion here. The F-14 also has a lot of doors, so we need to deal with all of our doors. Now, some of these Skymaster nipples, like these guys right here, they hold the line very, very well. So what I do when I deal with these cylinders is I will pull these off, put a little bit of silicone oil on both sides of the O-ring, cut the end off, put it on there, and then we've got a brand new end. But this end doesn't require any attention. But when you look at an end like the air brake here, so that only has a single little catch on there, and it was very easy for me to pull this line off. So this type of nipple doesn't really hold it very well. So that's one of the things that we're going through with this aircraft that I do with all of them. And there's the underside right there, so we got decent access to all of our air cylinders. Usually these gears, they've got usually a crappy nipple, so I'll usually wire tie those guys, but again, I just pull them off and just double check all those things, and then we'll check these guys as well. But I can see there they've got two little flanges on their nipples, so those are probably our strong holding ones. Yes, they are. So the first step, I guess, is we need to lay out all of our equipment and we need to get this stuff sorted. So let's lay it out and we'll take a look at what's going in this aircraft. All right, so we've got the F-14 off the stand. That is a lot of work. This is not a plane you move around yourself. One of the challenges with the 14 is you can't put it on a stand. So if you try and put this plane on a stand, as I've mentioned, it's too soft on the underside. So the way we've got this laid out here is we've got it on two hood stands. The back one is underneath the elevator former work, and the front one is just on the front joining former right here. So the whole point of this basically is to get access to the front gear. That's why we need it on this stand. Otherwise, once the gear is done, we can probably put it back on our adjustable stand and continue to work on it from there. The challenge is, of course, just that the landing gear removal and main wing removal in order to get all that service. So once that service is done and we've got everything else serviced on the aircraft, we should be good. All right, so here's all of our equipment laid out. Now this box is empty. We do have two Zykoy 240s coming. This is one of the boxes from the SU, but this is the power plant for this aircraft. F-14 XXL Central Box 400. We're using the 400 so we can use the BEC outputs to power various other things like lighting systems, etc., etc. The SPO6 switch, that's for our lighting system. The Skymaster controller for the lighting system is parasitic. So when this has battery plugged into it and no signal, there is a flashing LED light on here, so that's what the SPO6 switch is for. Coming across here, we've got two power box micro matches, and these are for the servos in the wing. I'm not sure if it's the spoilers or the leading edge, but one of those has two servos, and we're using the micro match to simplify things. We've got two Unilite afterburners here. These are amazingly powerful, so those are obviously going in the tail of the system, and we've got our Unilite controller as well too. These run off of 7.4 volts or 2-cell LiPo, so those can also run off of our BECs. So of course we've got a Cortex Demon Pro in here as well. We've got two Rex 7 receivers, and we're going to be adding a 900 receiver in the mix. So there's our receivers. These Rex 7s have the 40 centimeter dipole antennas. We've got an R3 that we're using for the on-off function, and we've got an M-speed sensor, Pitot tube, which will be installed close to the nose of the aircraft. Sticking with the control system, we've got the SE6 expander. So this gives us more channels, and here is the cable that goes along with it. Now in here we would use things like our air valves, so maybe canopy open close, air brake, wheel brakes. You know, this type of stuff is perfect for the SE6 because it's only using one port on the central box, but you're getting many different channels. For our filler, we're using the standard filler that we use for this owner. We've got a high flow vent fitting as well. We've got all of our air valves here. Now we're using the EvoJet air valve, so one for the doors. We're going to use one for the mains, one for the nose. With the Zykoy valves, we've got one for our brake, we've got one for our air brake on the back of the aircraft, and we've got two for our canopy. So one is for canopy lock and one is for canopy open close. Control surface section, we've got a bunch of carbon horns here for options with the MKS servos. I also picked up a set of these massive 8mm spline aluminum arms. I believe we're going to be using this for the elevators if possible. That's the goal with that stuff. And the HBL 388s are for our elevators on the aircraft. Everything else is going to be either 599s or 9930s. I can't remember the exact layout, but that is the servo selection, all MKS for this aircraft. And final little bits, we're using power box wire and connectors. Additionally, I forgot about this. We've got the randomizer from the RC Geek. Those are for the pilots from Warbird Pilots. And we've got two pilots that are movable heads for this aircraft as well. So this aircraft is 1/5 scale, I believe, and we've got one 4.5 to quarter scale pilots, and that's what we're finishing off that beautiful cockpit with. All right, so generally we would start off with doing our radio setup and radio programming. We're gonna skip that a little bit because we're waiting for the program from the owner. The owner of this F-14 is the same F-14 that we built a couple years ago, and we're basically going to duplicate that program. So we're taking that program and just reusing it for this aircraft because the functionality is going to be very similar. So once we get that, we'll do our radio setup, but we do have to update all of our devices, so we will plug all these into Jetty Studio, get those updated. All of our servos need to be run in for 990 cycles like we always do. So what I'll do now is I'm going to get a lot of this stuff in our drawers. That's usually what I've been doing lately, is putting all of our small parts in these drawers just to make them easy to access and know where all of our small parts are. Obviously, we've got a kind of an excess number of air cylinders. So we'll get that organized, and then our first step is going to be starting off with pulling out the landing gear. I think we're going to start off with the front gear first, and while we're here we're also going to get our steering servo set up as well because you've got good access right now to be able to do that. So taking the front gear out is fairly straightforward here. You basically have 4 bolts that hold it all in. Once those 4 bolts are undone, this kind of just slides forward. We have to be mindful of our air cylinders and such, but I believe that's going to be fairly simple to come out. All right, so we got all of our parts kind of organized here in this one bin. All of our servos are out of the servo cases and they are ready to cycle. So that stuff is all good and organized. And we've got our Jetty stuff here left on the table to organize. Now, I'm going to, just because I know I'm going to get this painted, I'm going to prime the nose cone here, or the support in the nose area, just to get that done. And the other thing I'm going to do is, this is one of those weight savings things in the aircraft. So it does include one of these big boards. This board would fit in the main fuselage area right here. But again, to minimize weight addition, we are going to be adding most likely our structure for each individual item. So as an example, with the central box here, we may just put in a strip like this, front and back, to support everything. We may put a big square in there, but it's going to be a very minimal install, and that is going to ultimately, hopefully, fingers crossed, get us to our goal weight or under. All right, so we got the front gear out, and this gear is pretty straightforward in the compared to some of these Skymaster gears. So there's a couple important things with the landing gear. Number one, we want to go through and Loctite everything. So we're Loctiting things like that, these fasteners, the main wheel bolts that hold the wheel together. The other thing you want to do is you want to take these pins out. These pins have a set screw, but that set screw is just installed on the pin itself. So there's no flat spot, so that will come loose. So you can see there it's got a mark from where the set screw was installed, so we will make a little flat spot, get that reinstalled, and then it's not going to go anywhere. So once we've gone through and Loctited everything, then we will worry about our steering servo. All right, so we've got our steering servo set up here. This steering servo gets installed like that. So the arm needs to be this direction. This setup came with the Futaba arm, which is perfect. That's exactly what we need for our MKS servos. The joiner piece here gets screwed on like this, and our big set screw is on the back side right there, and that goes on to that guy right there. Okay, so front gear is almost ready to go back in. We've got our servo mounted, of course Loctited in place, and everything works awesome with this setup. This is a really great setup. I'm happy to see Skymaster using this on more aircraft. It is definitely a phenomenal way to do this. So this air nipple here is one of the good ones that I was talking about earlier with the little double flanges on them. So in this case, what we do is I just snip off the expanded part. You can see there, it's a little bit expanded. It took a fair bit of force to pull that off. And then we'll reinstall this on the gear itself. Now this gear, these cylinders from Skymaster, they lock in the down position. So right now, there's no way to extend this front gear without going through a bit of a special setup here. So what we have to do is we have to put pressure on the downside, which is this blue line. So all I do is I hook this up to my air compressor. It doesn't have to be a tight fit or anything. Blow some air in there and clamp this off while it's got a little bit of pressure on the blue side, which is the downside of the cylinder. And then we can add air to the red side, which is the upside, as we slowly let off those forceps, and that will unlock these cylinders. Very easy to deal with, but you need to know that trick. So we're going to unlock the cylinder, and the point of unlocking the cylinder is so we can get a little bit of silicone shock oil installed on both sides of those cylinders, or this cylinder, to condition the seals in there. Okay, so I'll try and demonstrate this to you so you can see exactly how it works. So I just take my air compressor, pop that in there. Doesn't have to be a great fit or anything. And we pressurize the upside. So now there's some pressure in the blue line, which is holding the gear in the down position. So then what we'll do is we will take the red line, pop it in there. I will add pressure to this, and Ward's going to undo the blue line as I pressure this up, and you'll see this gear hopefully pop up. Okay. And there we go. So now with this gear like this, we can move it totally fine. It's totally movable and everything, but you won't be able to do that if you go down all the way. So if we extend this gear all the way down and that cylinder bottoms out, we are no longer able to unlock it unless we go through the stuff that we just did. Right, so we are all good. Our cylinder has been serviced with some shock oil, just silicone shock oil, and that is perfect. So this gear is ready to reinstall in the aircraft, but what we're going to do is we're going to service each of our door air cylinders here first to make sure they are dealt with and happy and have some nice lubricant inside them to seal them up. So we're essentially doing the same thing. We just pull the lines off of the cylinders, pull the lines off, snip new line, and then while we're cycling the door itself, we're just holding the silicone over top of the side that is giving suction. So when we're closing it, as an example, we're going to hold the silicone oil over top of this side. When we're opening it, it'll be the green side. And that just, all we want to do is get 1 or 2 drops in there. That's all we need. And the Skymaster cylinders, they've been doing a great job lately. So these ones, I can see that there's red Loctite on the nipple. There used to be nothing on these nipples, but for the past few years, they have been putting high sol or Loctite on those nipples, which is great. So we're going to go through and we're going to service those front doors. So there's 4 of those doors. This door here is the one that mounts to the actual air cylinder itself. And we'll get those cylinders dealt with so we can reinstall the front gear. All right, so front end is all complete. We've got the gear bolted back in place, and that is all good to go. Fairly uneventful on the front end. All of our cylinders are serviced. The only one left to do is the canopy open close, but the locks are done, and that is good. So let's take a look at the main section here. So next thing we're doing with the main section is we're going to pull our swing wing out, and that has to be the first thing to come out before we pull the gear out. So the gear is bolted through the swing wing with 2 big bolts through here. And I think that's the only thing holding the main wing spar stuff on. So when we undo those 2 bolts, this should just slide out. When we get our gear out, that's going to give us better access to all the cylinders. Now, what I'm talking about with the cylinders is you want to look for things just like that. So you can see when they put the cylinder together, the little O-ring that they have in there is coming out. So that's what that little black thing is. So this is the type of stuff that you want to deal with, and this is the reason to service all your cylinders before you go forward with an aircraft like this. All right, so we've got our wing opened up here, or our fuselage opened up. We've undone our 4 bolts holding the wing structure on. Now the wing structure, these are the bolts holding them on. There is only 4. There's a series of washers here as well too that fit between this and the I-beam. They're basically all the same thickness, but there's 4 of them. And this doesn't just come out. So just like the smaller F-14, you loosen this off, you drop the gear, and then the wing structure comes out. What happens is it kind of is shaped like this, like a U. So when you start pulling this out, the other side hits the I-beam and doesn't allow you to pull it out. So if you really wanted to damage your fuselage, you could keep pulling and it would destroy the center section. Or you can undo the bolts for your landing gear and drop the landing gear out, which is what we're doing. So we've undone all of our air lines, and we are now going to undo our fasteners holding this gear in place. All right, so we got our left gear out. Definitely a bit of a challenge, but it's out. Just as a heads up, this thing weighs 1,933 grams, which is 4.25 pounds. Crazy, crazy, crazy. And we're actually doing a live right now, and on the live, we're doing a giveaway for who got the weight the closest. So if you don't know about the lighter side of RC After Dark, I highly suggest you watch, because it's always exciting what we're doing here. Everybody that's on the live right now is seeing this video, seeing the stuff we're doing tonight with the F-14 like 2 weeks in advance. So definitely check it out. There's some links down below, but the lighter side of RC After Dark, it's a separate channel, tons of fun. The live chats and the live things are a blast. All right, so we got our main wing structure out, and just weighed it. Comes in at 10.13 pounds. It is beefy. A lot of the weight, yeah, feels like it's in here. And obviously the motor is going to be fairly heavy as well too, but that is a beefy, beefy structure. Very impressive. So we've got both of our gear out and our swing wing assembly, and it is time to Loctite everything. So this isn't an overly exciting portion in the project, but it's a necessary one. So the one thing we need to do is we need to take our motor assembly off. So this guy here, motor assembly comes out. Reason for that is we need to access our middle bolts and also our bolts right there as well too. So that's what we're doing on the swing wing assembly. On the gear itself, we're doing very much the same thing we did on the front. These pins right here, we'll be putting flat spots on, but everything else, like these guys, we just go through and Loctite everything. All right, so we've got the all the fasteners and everything were Loctited. I know I was looking for my cut-off L-bend Allen key, and I just ended up making another one. So all the Loctite's been done. We've got this hooked up to a 12-volt battery system. And I think I'm going to do a couple changes here when we go to put this in the aircraft. So we've got two outputs on this, this controller. I think I'm going to pair up both of the outputs. So we've got two positives going to one, two negatives going to one, and that'll just make it a little bit easier on the system here, because I've cycled this in and out a bunch of times and it does get warm. So, but it does have a lot of force as well too. So anyways, this is closing. It's about 7 seconds for a full cycle, which is awesome. And then the other thing I did was opening it. If you put a bunch of force on it, so I'm squishing that, it's got a lot of torque, which is very good. So I don't suspect there's going to be any stalls or any issues with this at all. Looks like it's a really rock solid system. Very nice to see. Motor hasn't even gotten warm with all my cycles. The controller gets a little bit warm, but we are going to, again, like I said, pair those outputs up a little bit. And that should help. So looks like a wicked system. That is very impressive. All right, so servo cycling, we've only got 4 servos left to do. Well, 3 actually. This one's in progress. And then all of our servos have been cycled. That's good. And we're moving on to fuel tanks now. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but I want to get these fuel tanks set up and curing. Now we're using a bit of a combination here. So the problem with the stock setup that comes with the plane is it's not a high flow setup, and we want a high flow setup. So we're using DreamWorks fuel fittings here. This is how they come. So we've got the piece that gets glued into the tank like that. And we've got our high flow bung for large fuel tubing. So we need 2 of those guys. We're using the DreamWorks high flow vents, which I keep in stock as well too. That's those guys. And then we're also using the DreamWorks high flow clunks, because the stock clunks don't fit through that bung fitting, but the DreamWorks ones with a little O-ring do. So this is all 8mm fittings and all what we need to get this set up perfectly. So clunks going in there obviously, and our vent fitting is just going to go right in that area above the clunk line. So these fittings almost fit in there. We just need to do a little bit of sanding on the opening, not much at all, but they're almost good enough to fit in there. And then I just use my align reamer tool to do this hole up top. And then we roughen around the perimeter with our Dremel to allow good bonding surface. And then we're going to get those high soled in place. All right, and there's the final product of our high flow vents and high flow bung fittings getting installed. I don't do any tooling to the bung fitting. That's just high sol installed around there, placed it in place, and just give it a little twist as we installed it. And this is exactly how we're going to leave it. We've got glue coming through our holes. There's a nice lip on the inner flange and everything, so we just leave that. Vent fitting, those are installed, and I used a gloved finger and did a little bit of tooling around the vent line, and those are good to go. So we'll leave those be to cure, and later on we will pressure test and get our bung set up with those tanks. All right, and our last servo is up getting tested. We got our Pitot tube M-speed sensor mounted right there, comes out of the cannon or gun right here. We just have the tip sticking out. And yes, you do not need to let me know that this Pitot tube setup will not work. It works 100% fine. That's how we do it on our planes. Previous F-14, exact same location, works beautifully, and may not be 100% accurate. It could be 99% accurate, but it's a nice, slick way to mount the Pitot tube, so we do not have this big ugly thing sticking out of the nose or a mount or anything like that. So we use the atmospheric pressure from inside the fuselage, and just the tip of our Pitot tube sticks out, and we just use the red line right here. The white line comes off of the M-speed sensor. So when you're dealing with the main wheels here, there's no visible fasteners from the back side or from the front side or the outside. They're all done from the inside. So we pop the wheel off, and then we just go through and Loctite all of our fasteners holding our actual wheel together. And this is fairly important. Well, it's extremely important because the rim assembly is multiple pieces, and those pieces staying together is part of what holds the air in the tire assembly. So anyways, make sure you do this step. And the other important thing when you're doing this is to pay very close attention to how the brake system is put together. It's very important that the pads and all the pieces get put back together in the proper order. So usually what I do in this case is try and keep everything on the actual leg, which I've done except the one plate that's still mounted to the wheel. But that makes sure that it goes back together fairly straightforward and goes back together properly. So main gear is all serviced, ready to go, Loctited, and we also, like everything else, put a couple drops of silicone lube in each of our cylinders. So our lock cylinder here and our main cylinder as well too on both sides. So that stuff is good to go. Next thing to get done is our cylinders for the main doors. So we've got 3 doors here, so 1, and then there's 2 in the front. Those are going to be a little bit of a pain to get to, but we're going to get those cylinders serviced as well. This is the one that I've shown previously with the O-ring, so this one may need to come off completely, but we're going to get all of those cylinders done in the same manner that we did the other ones. Okay, so a couple important points here, and I'm doing something a little bit different. So when I took that cylinder apart, one thing I noticed was that Skymaster has lubricated the O-ring inside the air cylinders. There was a little bit of grease and lubricant in there, which is a very, very nice thing to see. Those cylinders used to come completely dry, which is why I would add the silicone oil. So I'm very happy to see that. That is like one of those amazing steps that may not sound like a lot, but it is a huge thing. The other thing that I'm doing is something a little bit different on this setup. So I'll show you exactly what I'm doing. So generally I would service the air cylinders and then I would just continue putting the plane together. But what I did was I took my Robart air pump and have a Festo fitting on there, what is that, a 3mm size, hooked it up, filled it up to 100 psi, and clamped it off. Now the point of this is the systems are all separate on the aircraft. Skymaster does a great job of putting this together. So we've got one air cylinder system here, another air cylinder system here for the mains, and then we've got another yellow and green line set up, and this is for the air brakes in the back. So I'm just going to leave these pressurized for a while and make sure they hold air. I'm not necessarily worried about the amount of pressure, because if there was a pretty serious leak on these guys, you know, you give it 30 minutes and that pressure is going to disappear. But as long as after 30 minutes it still has a significant amount of pressure in there, we know we're doing good. So this is something a little bit different that I wouldn't generally do, but it's so much easier to deal with this now than later on when you're chasing problems. So something a little bit different, learning, always learning. We should always be learning. All right, guys, and that wraps up video number 1 in the build series of the Skymaster XXL F-14. Lots of good accomplishments in this video. We definitely made some good progress. Next video, we're going to continue working from the back end forward. I don't think we're going to get the wing mechanism and the gear back in yet, but we'll see how things go. Thanks guys so much for watching the video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to list them down below. You can also reach out to me at thelightersideofrc@gmail.com, and that way you know I'll pretty much guaranteed to get your message or your email. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.